Thornhill.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise and discuss for a while some of the issues that feed into the government's management of money, which is, after all, what a supply bill addresses. I think we'll be voting for it because we too believe that at the end of the day, the people who work for this government deserve their paycheck, and that's what a supply bill assures. But this government has to be held to account. This government is all about money, and I listened with interest to my colleague from Kitchener-Conestoga rhyming off a long, long list of what she believes are accomplishments of this government. You've got to do it with more enthusiasm, though, I would say to my friend, because then I might even buy into some of this stuff. And listening to it rattled off that way, I'm not sure that I do. Here's what I am sure of, that I had lunch at McDonald's today, and I made sure to order the McGuinty value meal. That's the one that's the most expensive thing on the menu, but the guy behind you pays. Okay? Yeah, it's an attempt at humor, but the point I'm trying to make here is the McGuinty government is about that. And when you start to rhyme off lists of things that you've accomplished, you have to remember who put their hand in their pocket to accomplish what you believe are the successes that you've scored. That member from Kitchener-Conestoga is one of the members who debated and voted against my Bill 143, for example, 2 weeks ago, which was a bill that was supported by all three parties originally, and a bill that would have helped seniors, who are arguably the hardest hit in our population, defer property taxes of up to $5,000 per year. But she didn't. And she didn't by reading a list of reasons why, the same way she did today on the supply bill. And I don't think that she really believes what she's saying. So we'll dispense with that, and we'll get on with my premise that really places the onus on this government to account for how it handles money. This government, from that perspective, is not respectful of Ontario families. It is not respectful of Ontario families. It decides on a program that's good for all of them, takes the money from them to pay for these programs, and then says, look what we've done. That's an inappropriate approach because it doesn't reflect either what Ontario families necessarily want. They didn't get a 4-year mandate to do anything they liked. It doesn't reflect, given the times, what Ontario families need, because Ontario families' needs have changed very radically over the course of the past 4 years. I'd like to focus for a moment on issues in my own riding of Thornhill. I've said in this legislature many times that there is a clear-cut disparity owing to the lack of a proper funding formula for the delivery of health care services between the 416 and the 905. So simply by living on one side of Steeles Avenue at the north end of Toronto, or the other side of it at the south end of York Region, the medical expenditures on a per capita basis vary by a significant amount and a significant percentage. If you live in Toronto, 416, the average amount spent on you is somewhere in the $950 per year range. If you live in York Region, Thornhill, it's about $200 less, about $750 per capita. Why would that be? Well, the main reason is because of the huge growth in York Region vis-a-vis Toronto, which has not sustained that kind of growth. And the fact of the matter is there is an inappropriate approach to a funding formula that has to look at the real needs of a community on that basis. And I will cite some figures. Thornhill has a growing population. Thornhill spans significant pieces of two significant municipalities. One is Markham and one is Vaughan. The growth rate, the fastest growth rate areas of the province happen to be where? In Markham and Vaughan. The growth rate in Vaughan is 30%. In Markham, 20%. You can't come close to that anywhere else. And so I want to move from one area, the healthcare funding that I've just specified, and look at social services. Social services representatives, including a representative mom, came to see me last week. And I've seen these people basically for 4 years running now, and it's always the same. They look pained in terms of how they approach me, because there's always this belief that an MPP, any MPP, has some sweeping powers and can make things change, when we all know that regardless of whether we're on this side of the House or the government side of the House, all we can do is bring the concerns to this House and see if we can do something about it. So social services in an area of growth are suffering in the same, if not a worse way, than health services in York Region. And I'll cite the numbers here as well. Children's services under social service funding to this riding has nowhere near increased parallel to the population. As a matter of fact, York Region sustains children's allocation for children's services of $127 per capita per annum, versus the provincial average of $221. So ask yourself, when you hear me say that, how you even begin to consider supplying the social services required for children, needy children, and I don't mean just in the poverty sense, albeit that it's true too, in York Region, versus what you're doing in the rest of the province. It's almost impossible, and many in the children's service sector are convinced that essentially the crisis they have been apprehending has now arrived. They can't treat autistic kids. They can't treat kids with all kinds of problems. They just can't do it. So it's not a question of wait list. It's a question of where's the money coming from? We just don't have it. And this can't continue any longer. It just can't. Children's services, intervention people, coordinators, administrators, have all approached me with their concerns. And they've got a mixture of problems. Obviously, the major one is severe underfunding and a bit of political roulette that seems to be a very significant piece of the pie or piece of the puzzle right now. Ministries switched in terms of who has the authority over children's services as it pertained to mental health services. Very, very crucial issue. It formerly came under Children and Youth Services and has now moved to the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. So what happens is it falls between stools, and over the course of approximately the last 15 years, according to the people that I'm talking to, they've sustained only 2 funding increases. And we're talking many years ago, and not sustainable funding increases. Nothing that they can really count on. I recall going back to Children's Aid and an issue that arose last year. The member from York Simcoe, the member from Newmarket Aurora, and myself, all York Region Conservative opposition members, made a fairly major fuss about the fact that Children's Aid was not only getting no increase, but was being cut last year. And we, thank goodness, the fuss we made was enough to get the funding restored, but only restored to former levels. So Children's Aid couldn't do its job. Children's mental health is suffering. We've got a problem in York Region that comes from a disparity in funding. And so I wanted to put that on the record because it has to be on the record somewhere. And my friend from Beaches East York, in debate about half an hour ago, talked about this government doing the right thing. So where I can listen to a Liberal member like the member from Kitchener-Conestoga talk about all of these things she believes the government has scored points on, and then I listen to the member from Beaches East York saying I defy the government to ante up when it comes to poverty, I too have a problem. But I can say, unlike what sounded like a positively oriented incitement to the government to do something on the part of the member from Beaches East York, I fear that we're not going to see any change, not in the budget next week and certainly not between now and the election slated for October the 6th. And I fear as well that the fallout from that will be faced by the next government, and I expect that to be a government made up of people from this side of the House. Let me move on to another issue that affects people in York Region that I also wanted to get on the record. You know, speaking of election campaigns, there was an election campaign in 2007, and my opponent at the time, the Liberal incumbent, ran on a promise that the McGuinty government would extend the subway line from, this is the Yonge Street subway line, from Finch Avenue right up into the heart of York Region. And indeed, that was placed on a list by Metrolinx of priorities for the GTA. And it was unfortunately at a price of $3 to $3.5 billion, not considered a priority that was right for the times, not then, not since. That's a subway line that has to be built. That was an empty promise coming from the Liberal side. That was part of Move Ontario 2020. I can tell you that on the question of extending the subway under Yonge Street, if you could put the shovels in the ground this afternoon, you wouldn't be cutting any ribbons until 2020 or after. That's what it takes to build a subway. So I want to see that happen. The transit infrastructure in the GTA and the province as a whole is in dismal shape. We know that because it's been left fallow for years. Now, if I were asking this question in question period of the Minister of Transportation across the way, what I'd get back is a tirade about what some government 15 years ago under somebody named Harris might or might not have done, because they like to cite history. I'm concerned with history over the last 8 years. I'm concerned with promises made, promises broken. I'm concerned with what you consider to be your record over there, and I'm concerned with your ability to continue. So transit infrastructure in the GTA, something that has gone sadly lacking. Transit needs to be expanded, but it needs to be done so. It needs to be done in an equitable and in a manageable fashion. Not every time you feel a need, there's an election coming up, we'll throw you a subway car, that kind of thing. It is apparent that wherever and whenever transit infrastructure is expanded and is modernized, there is an automatic commercial expansion that takes place. There's no question that the Yonge Street corridor going up past Richmond Hill is an area that in all official plans, York Region, the town of Markham, the city of Vaughan, up into Richmond Hill, it's planned for intensification. Some of it's already started. If there were a subway announced, there would be an awful lot more, and it's something that's been urgent for a number of years now. Not a question of if, but when, and the when has never been when anybody said. It is really a function of Metrolinx, and we have to look at what Metrolinx is. Metrolinx has been basically using taxpayer dollars to produce supposed projects for transit improvement, but really there's so little to show for it at this point. So I'm anxious for next week's budget to see what the promises are this time. I hope there's some money for York Region Transit, but I'm not holding my breath. Vaughan Hospital would be another example of infrastructure that is way overdue. We've been talking about it for 6 years. There's a very vibrant grassroots organization that has raised well in excess of $1 million per year, and then more by private donation. There's been an assessment placed on the property tax bills for citizens of Vaughan for the last number of years for that as well. The city of Vaughan has purchased land for that hospital, so it has a place to live. There's been money allocated by the Ministry of Health under, and this is how far back it goes, then Health Minister George Smitherman to do initial studies, and then an additional $5 million to do master planning. Most recently, Minister Fantino of the federal government came in and promised $15 million federal dollars. This was unheard of, that federal money should be allocated towards a hospital. He said he could do it in his campaign, and then he went and did it. Now I challenge the Liberal government of the day to create that hospital. And let's just see if you're going to do it as an election promise. Goodness knows, again, it's needed. And that forms part of, I'm relating back now to the business of whether you fund people in the 905 in York Region in the same way as you fund the 416. Lastly, before I sit down and yield the floor to my friend, Concord West ratepayers and community people, Concord West Ratepayers Association, is a very interesting group, grassroots group in the western part of my riding. This community takes the initiative themselves to bring about change. They want to give input on how growth plans and other projects will impact their lives. I read a petition for the first time into the record today. Community organizations are there to ensure that their community is enhanced. And what I want to say about these people is they've been around for many years. They've lived in their homes for 40 years. And they moved out to that area at the western side of my riding of Thornhill with a view to nature. They could walk in fields and on paths. They weren't surrounded by anything. Now they've got the 407 to the south. They've got an industrial park to the east. They've got an expanded Highway 7 and infrastructure being built to the north, and they've got one area that's been left to them, and now they've been told that there will ultimately be a transit way built up the center of 407, and that right next to their homes there will be a hub for that transit way, a car park for thousands of cars, a stop for a new expanded GO service. And yes, that may not happen ultimately till sometime after 2020, but it's been earmarked, so it changes the scope of their homes. Let me tell you how intensely devoted to their homes they are. If you think about it, that probably makes the homes more valuable because of their proximity to this great mass transit. They don't think of it that way. They wanted their peace and their quiet. They had their peace and their quiet, and the government wouldn't listen to them even though they engaged professionals to come up with alternative plans. And so they've now started a grassroots campaign. They've written a letter to Premier McGuinty. They've started writing petitions. They've met with municipal groups. And all they really want is to have the ORC land there transferred to the Toronto Conservation Authority so that they can make the appropriate changes. It's a great idea. It's something that should be granted to them. And it's, again, an example of people who are, for the most part, moving towards the elderly range of the age scale, who want to do something for themselves to preserve their way of life. The McGuinty government is about money. Anytime I ask a question in this House, or any of my colleagues ask a question, I get a money answer. We've spent this much on this and that much on that, and we're going to spend this much on the next thing. Start listening to people. Yes, we'll vote for your supply bill. That's not the issue. Okay, but the money is the issue. And the money is really a means by which you address the way of life that people have. And they have a right to some of their own choices, and you haven't given them the opportunity to make those choices.